Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Strike, and today we're going to be looking at my Undying Shaman deck. Now, this deck is based originally on the Crusher Shaman Legendary deck from Hearthstone.com, and I'll link to that in the description below. It was posted by a user named HS Crusher, and he used his version of the deck to get from rank 13 to Legendary last season. And I think this is a very interesting deck because it kind of departs from the normal Shaman decks that you see all over the internet and in-game and so on and so forth, that usually just kind of rely on totems and lower cost minions and just kind of flooding the board with a whole bunch of stuff. This deck relies on basically bringing bigger minions to the table and combining this with cards like Ancestral Healing and Ancestral Spirit. Now, normally you don't see these cards getting played in any deck, and I'll be honest, when I first started the game and I saw these cards, I was like, who would ever use these? It's a 2 cost that, okay, like, what's the point of it? But as time went on, and after I saw his version of the deck, I was like, this is actually pretty awesome. I can see how it synergizes with all this other stuff. And so the new season started, and I decided to make my own version of it. I changed some things in the deck that I didn't quite agree with, and of course I adjusted things based on other decks that I was seeing in the ranked ladder. It's important to do this because things change every season, and even sometimes on a weekly basis you see different decks pop up, and all of a sudden everybody's running that new deck. So basically, the way this works is you have Ancestral Healing, which will restore a minion to full health and give it taunt. This is really excellent with a card like Injured Blade Master. Now, his battle cry is pretty terrible on its own. He's a 3 cost 4/7, but he deals 4 damage to himself, so he's a 4/3 and it just trades badly. And normally you're like, why would I put this in my deck? It's a terrible card. But mix it with Ancestral Healing, which is a 0 cost card, and as early as turn 3 or turn 2 with a coin, you have yourself an Injured Blade Master that's a 4/7. Now, if you do this on turn 4 with a coin or turn 5 without, then you can throw in an Ancestral Spirit and you can have yourself essentially a 4/10. Now, I don't know if I would necessarily throw in an Ancestral Healing on that as well, unless I was really positive that it wasn't going to get silenced or polymorphed or hexed or whatever. But you could do that technically, and you could have yourself a 4/7 Injured Blade Master with taunt that when it dies, as the Ancestral Spirit card says, when that minion is destroyed, return it to the battlefield. And when it returns to the battlefield, the battle cry does not trigger a second time. So you have a 4/7 back on the field as soon as it dies that they have to get rid of. Of course, the taunt would be gone, but it's pretty awesome regardless. And of course, you can combine this with a card like Earth Elemental. You use the Ancestral Spirit with Earth Elemental, and now you essentially have an extra 16 life, because they have to get through one Earth Elemental, and then as soon as they kill it off, it comes back again with taunt, and it doesn't overload you a second time. So you get amazing value out of the Ancestral Spirit. You have to strategize with this deck, and you have to play it in an intelligent way. You generally have to play it kind of like a chess game, or if you're familiar with it, Go, where you're thinking at least 1 to 2 to 3 steps ahead of your opponent. You're planning out how you're going to manage your overloads, because it's very important to do so. If you use an Earth Elemental on turn 5, then you've overloaded yourself by 3, which means on turn 6, you only have 3 mana. You won't get that mana back until the next turn. So if your opponent does something, and you're like, oh man, well, I've got this Fire Elemental in my hand, and I need to deal with this. I need to throw this out, right? Oh, well, I've only got 3 mana. So you can't do that until turn 7. So you can really screw your mana curve, and you could really kind of just throw the game if you just carelessly throw an Earth Elemental out. Plus, being a 7/8, it's susceptible to Big Game Hunter, and it will most definitely be a target of hexes and polymorphs and earth shocks, you name it. If they have any sort of silence or any hard removal, they're gonna go for your Earth Elemental. So I never throw these out in turn 5 unless I am desperate or I'm so far ahead that I don't even care that I only have 3 mana on turn 6. You know, I'll just throw it out on turn 5 because I'm so secure in my lead that I'm absolutely certain that there's really nothing that is going to be better at this point, or is really going to matter. Now, of course, if you get careless with that, that could come back to bite you in the ass, but, you know, just generally speaking. And then, of course, there's other cards like Wild Pyromancer to deal with the aggro/rush decks. You really need that removal early on when dealing with these, because if you don't have it, then by turn 4 or 5, you're dead. So I have 2 of these in the deck. I have 2 Earthshocks because Earthshock is such a good card that I can't justify not having 2. Lightning Bolt is standard, not really much to say there. Deal 3 damage, overload 1. And then Fairy Dragon. Fairy Dragon is an amazing card in my opinion right now because it can't be targeted by spells or hero powers. You can't silence it because you can't target it. You can't remove it with something like Backstab because you can't target it. So it forces them to react to it. And this usually comes down to them equipping a weapon to hard remove it, which means they still take 3 damage anyway. Or they have to throw a minion on the board to deal with it, or it has to be caught up in like an AoE spell. But this is such a great card to have in the deck, especially early game. You get one of these down, it gives you an advantage over many of the classes, and they have to respond in kind. And if you can keep board control as a shaman, and you can keep your opponent kind of reacting rather than being the aggressor, then you generally win the game. Feral Spirit. This was in the original by HS Crusher, just 1 Feral Spirit. The reason that only 1 is because if you overload by too much during a game, then that really cramps you up. And while a 3 cost with 2 overloads seems nice for 2/2/3s, that overload is pretty costly in the long run, so you just don't really need 2 in your deck. And you don't want to, in my opinion, unless you absolutely need to, throw them out right in turn 3. They're generally something you want to save for later in the game when you want to protect something like your Manatee Totem, so you can draw some cards off it. You know, if they don't have something like a Swipe or any of the other removal cards that all of the different classes have, then you can get potentially 2 to 3 turns out of your Manatee Totem, which is an extra 2 to 3 cards that you wouldn't have drawn otherwise. Hex is a standard card in any deck. Lightning Storm, in my opinion, with the current meta, with all the zoo/face rush decks, you just got to have 2 Lightning Storms in your deck. It gives you a greater chance to draw it, and when they're throwing 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 minions on the board, just flooding the board with minions, then having a Lightning Storm to just clear all that out is amazing. Again, Injured Blade Master, by itself it sucks, but combine it with Ancestral Healing or Ancestral Spirit, and it becomes amazing. Leroy Jenkins, this was a card that I was kind of iffy on at first, but I threw this in the deck because it gives you burst, and that's what this deck is missing. You might think, well, the Earth Elemental gives you a lot of burst. I mean, that's a 7/8, or you have the Fire Elemental, which deals 3 damage when you throw it out, but that's not really burst. When I talk burst, I'm talking like a fireball, where, you know, you instantly do 6 damage that turn. So for a 4 cost 6/2, you can throw it out, and you can even combine it with a Lightning Storm if you have enough mana to clear off the whelps and any minions on their side, so they can't basically come back at you and use your whelps against you. So Leroy Jenkins also combines amazingly well with Windspeaker, which is why I threw a Windspeaker in here. And Windspeaker also works well with any of the other cards, really, because let's say you already have an Earth Elemental on the board. You've got a 7/8, so you have a Windspeaker in your hand, throw your Windspeaker out, give him Wind Fury, and now you have a 7/8 with Wind Fury. You can do 14 damage potentially in 1 turn with him. And if he has Ancestral Spirit and he dies, he'll come back. He won't have Wind Fury this time, but he'll still come back. So it's a fantastic combination. Windspeaker goes extremely well with Leroy. It gives you basically, for a cost of 8 mana, which is 2 fireballs for a mage, up to 12 burst damage. Of course, if there's taunts on the board and such, then you potentially aren't going to be able to get through them, and that can be a problem. So basically having Leroy in the deck is kind of a fireball, and it's really what I felt the deck needed. It just needed some way to burst down your opponent. The Ascension Shieldmaster, pretty standard card, not much to say there. It's a 4 cost, 3/5, a taunt, just all around solid. It really just kind of slows down your opponent and keeps them from being able to face damage you the whole time, so I like having one of these in the deck. Another thing about the Earth Elemental, again, don't forget about the overload. You always have to plan for the overload. If you don't plan for the overload, then you're going to have a lot of bad games. A Faceless Manipulator, you can do some fun stuff with this guy. Either copy your opponent's cards or copy your own. Get an Earth Elemental, go ahead and hook him up with Ancestral Spirit, and then use a Faceless Manipulator the next turn and have a field day with that. You have basically an extra 32 life if they don't have a way like a polymorph or something to get rid of that. So very excellent to have, and you've already got 2 Earth Elementals, and you could potentially have a third on the board if things go your way. And I don't think there's any way anybody's going to be able to win if you have 2, 7, 8 Earth Elementals on the board, and then you copy another one again, and now you've got 3, and they all have Ancestral Spirits, so as soon as you kill them off, they all come back. I just don't think there's enough damage in any deck to really deal with that. Then, of course, you have the Karen Bloodhoof, and this is questionable to some people. Some people don't like this card in the deck. They prefer the Black Knight, and you can certainly add the Black Knight into the deck. But the Karen Bloodhoof I love because it's basically a Yeti that respawns immediately as soon as it dies. So it's basically 2 Yetis for 6 mana. And a Yeti is generally 4 mana. Now, if you take this and you throw an Ancestral Spirit on him, the cool thing is that when the Karen Bloodhoof dies, he will still spawn a 4/5 Bane Bloodhoof. However, the original Karen Bloodhoof will still respawn, so when he dies again, he will spawn another Bane Bloodhoof. Now, if you want to, you could actually substitute in something like a Sun Fury Protector or a Defender of Argus into this deck, and when you have a Karen Bloodhoof and he dies and then comes back, you could throw down the Sun Fury Protector, and now you have 2 4/5s with taunt, and that's pretty powerful, especially since they can attack. So I've had good success with this. It slows down a lot of decks, prevents them from getting to your face, prevents them from taking out your other more important minions, even things like your Manatide Totem. So I'm keeping him in the deck for now. I've been very happy with the results I've had so far. The Fire Elemental, all around very solid card. It's a 6 cost, 6/5, so the life total isn't amazing. He's kind of generally kind of easier to remove than, say, something like an Earth Elemental with 8 life. But he deals 3 damage as soon as he comes out, whether to the face or to a minion. So he can actually be a really good minion to throw out to finish off something else, or to basically initiate damage on something so you can then finish it off with something else. The Fire Elementals are also really good for attracting your enemy. Basically, you throw an Earth Elemental and they're like, oh man, that's scary, I need to get rid of it. And so then they start using their hexes and all their removal spells and control spells and such on your Fire Elementals. Once they've used all of that, then you can go, well, thank you. And then you throw out your Earth Elemental and you drop Ancestral Spirit on him. And now they're like, oh, well, what do I do now? So this deck kind of relies on you playing mind games with your opponent a bit. Right now you have an advantage to where a lot of people aren't really used to playing against a shaman with this sort of deck setup. So you can kind of get away with playing mind games with them and kind of bidding out their removal spells and their control spells, so that when you finally do throw out something big like your Earth Elemental or your Sylvanas or your Karen Bloodhoof or whatever, that they're unprepared for it. Now, Sylvanas Windrunner, again, synergizes so well with Ancestral Spirit. Her Death Rattle will trigger a second time, so you can even do something tricky like taking a Wind Speaker and throwing Wind Fury on your Sylvanas, which I actually did in a game today to kill off 2 of the smaller enemy minions. One was a 2/2 and a 3/2, and basically I gave her Wind Fury, ran her into both of them. I then stole the enemy's 4/6 taunt, and then I still had a Sylvanas because she respawns thanks to an Ancestral Spirit, and I had his 4/6 taunt on my side now, and if I wanted to, I could throw her into something else if he throws down like a Ragnaros or something and steal that too. So it gives you the ability to potentially steal up to 2 or even 3 cards from your opponent if you use both of your Ancestral Spirits on her. It's really an insane combo. So it synergizes so well with this deck. I was like, I have to have a Sylvanas Windrunner. Absolutely. There's no way I can just not have this in my deck. Now, the original deck had Ragnaros, and I can absolutely see why you would want that. It's an 8 cost, 8/8, and as soon as you throw him out, he does 8 damage to a random target. But the Leroy Jenkins basically resolves that for me, and it allows me to choose my target and do up to 12 damage for 8 mana in one turn. So I feel that it's a bit more reliable, although, of course, I don't have the luxury of pulling in a Maz and, there's 5 minions on the board, multiple ones with taunt, and it still hits the face with a Leroy. If there's taunts on the board, I have to find some other way to deal with them because Leroy is going to be useless. So anyway, that is my Undying Shaman deck, which is, again, kind of a branch off from HS Crusher's Crusher Shaman Legendary deck from Hearthstone. And again, you can find the link to the original deck in the description below. I hope you liked the video. Give it a whirl in your own time, whether it's in casual or on the ladder. See how you like the deck. Practice makes perfect. This is a difficult deck to play, so it will take some time to get used to. Feel free to sub in some own cards. Try it out, see what you think, and let me know if you find something else that you think works really well with this deck that isn't in the original or in my version. I'd love to hear from you. Again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. This is Striketh, checking out.